Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
In 2002, a U.S. Army patrol went missing in a very remote area of Kandahar province, Afghanistan. Another patrol was dispatched on a search and rescue mission. One soldier commented on what they found. As we bent around this corner, you could see the opening of the cave. And then I see a lot of rocks, which is another oddity. And then bone matter. I'm not close enough to identify what kind of bones, but I did see what I knew to be a piece of our communications equipment. So instantly we're thinking ambush, maybe animal, could be anything. There was enough room in front of the cave, but it had a sheer drop-off, but there was enough room that we got into a decent dispersal in case of ambush. Not long after they had gotten into that dispersal formation, they saw something emerge from the cave that caught them fully off guard. It was a man at least 12 to 15 feet in height. This is a monster. Red beard, his hair was longish, past his shoulders, a scarlet red. Dan runs at him and starts shooting, which broke all of us into reality because it was surreal. While Dan is moving at him, another bro of mine is laying down fire and I start firing. He skewers Dan. He's now got him on this pike. It went through him. He's got him and he's coming after more. We all just clicked in. I don't know what it was, but I remember we were all like, shoot him in the face, shoot him in the face. He's taking multiple hits and he's still moving. Eventually, the giant was killed. A helicopter soon arrived and dropped some cargo netting. A larger helicopter came by, dropped a hook, and the giant was carried off. The soldier confirmed that the red-haired, fair-skinned giant had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. After they had submitted their report, the soldier recounts that they were told by their top brass to edit it in a particular fashion, presumably to remove any mention of a giant being. Another special operations soldier in Afghanistan provides the following testimony to the incident, even though he was not a direct witness to the incident. We would come back to the base and start hearing this rumor about a unit that killed this, what they started calling this really tall person. At first I didn't think anything of it, then came to find out that the person they killed was actually 3 times the size of a man, had extra digits on their hands, and extra digits on their feet, and had red hair, and a special unit had come in and wanted this target. Well, we'd heard that they killed this thing inside a cave, or the mouth of a cave, and there was common knowledge among the military to hear this. When you first hear, you're thinking like, this has got to be a joke. This has got to be a hoax. Then after things go down a certain way, and you keep hearing it, you start to realize it's not a joke. This pilot had landed at a base in Afghanistan and was told that they had to pick up special cargo and that there were absolutely no cameras allowed. The pilot describes the cargo. It was basically a dead guy, and this guy was extremely large, and when I say large, our pallets are basically, if I remember correctly, about 9 by 12 feet or so, and this guy was laying in a fetal position on the pallet, and he filled the pallet. He was around an 11-pound guy. The pilot corroborated much more of the details given by the other 2 witnesses, including the fact that this giant was fair-skinned, red-haired, and had extra digits on his hands and feet.
Now this account is not my own, but was told to me by a Marine doing combat tours in Afghanistan. For the sake of his own job and security clearance, he has asked that I not give any names and never mention what region they were operating in. From my understanding, the individuals who were with him during the encounter were from a task force operating under orders for the CIA. Beyond that, I was told next to nothing. I will refer to him as Sarge if only to have a name. Anyway, here's his story. During a patrol checking on some local farmers, Sarge's unit was made aware of a deadly being living in a cave system near their farms. When pushed for more information, the locals were only willing to say that this being was stealing from their farms and had killed a few people who had made the mistake of trying to protect their livelihood from it. Convinced, the locals were being harassed by a group of Taliban fighters. Half of Sarge's unit was sent out to investigate and either arrest or kill any hostile forces in the area. So, with a few Humvees armed with M2 machine guns, they went out to the cave where the mysterious being supposedly lived. Upon arrival, they noticed nothing of interest. There were signs that something was living in the cave, and the soldiers found animal bones scattered around the entry. Not wanting to risk his entire unit fighting in a cave that the enemy would know very well, Sarge sent his 2 fastest Marines to investigate. The 2 men just gave the others a cocky grin and a thumbs up before disappearing into the darkness beyond the mouth of the cave. For 10 minutes, there was nothing. Not a single sound inside or outside the cave other than the idle chatter of the bored Marines. Then sound erupted from the cave, shouting and screaming. In a matter of seconds, the 2 men emerged from the cave at a full run and zipped past their teammates, one of them shouting, "Run, just run." But like the hard-ass special forces operators they were, the other soldiers stood their ground, only to see a massive man emerge from the cave. He stood nearly 10 feet tall with leathery skin and red hair. In one of its massive hands was a log that it began waving at the soldiers in a very obviously threatening manner. Shocked, but not panicked, Sarge commanded his men to shoot it, and the 12 Marines opened fire. But the bullets seemed to be doing little more than pissing this giant off. Finally, in desperation, one of them fired a grenade launcher at the being, blowing out a massive chunk of its flesh, exposing a small portion of the ribs and ripping most of the skin and muscle off. The giant retreated into the cave, and the soldiers decided that the best thing to do was head back to the village and report to the rest of their unit. Clearly, this was more than a few Taliban militants. Even with that gaping wound, the giant was too terrifying for the Marines to willingly walk into its territory. So, they headed back and reported to their commanding officer. Of course, their boss didn't believe them and demanded to see proof, so that night, they drove him out to the cave and showed him some of the shredded flesh that had been blown off by the grenade launcher. From here, the report went up the chain, and nobody knows what was done about this creature. I wish he would have told me more. From what I've managed to find on my own, accounts like this are not uncommon in that part of the Middle East. Of course, since all of these reports were word-of-mouth stories, I don't know how factual they are, or if they're being exaggerated.
It was the spring of 2007. My then-boyfriend and I were on our way from New York down to Miami to go to a music festival. We were driving south on the highway along the east coast of Central Florida when we pulled into a rest area so that he could catch a nap. He had been driving all day when he decided that he desperately needed a short rest before getting back behind the wheel. We had very recently bought the van and he did not think that I could handle maneuvering it, so he was doing all of the driving. I later proved him wrong. He parked and jumped in the back of the van and laid down on the futon mattress that we had laid there. He told me to leave him alone and he proceeded to pass out from exhaustion. I was pretty freaked out because the rest area building was unmanned, locked up, and dark inside. The restrooms were closed. The small rest area building was surrounded by dark woods. There were about 4 other cars in the small parking lot but no sign of any drivers, so I imagine they were having an emergency laydown as well. Normally I would never have set foot outside of the van alone in such a scenario. My instincts told me not to get out of the van. But I had taken some Midol for my menstrual cramps and they had given me brutal nausea. I needed some pretzels. I mustered up all of my courage and opened the passenger side door and squeezed through the space between our vehicle and the vehicle that was parked directly next to ours. As soon as I had a clear line of sight to the front of the rest stop building, I saw the thing and saw it clearly. Straight ahead I saw the brightly lit front facade of the rest stop. To the left of the doors was it. To the right of the doors was a vending machine. Immediately, it communicated with me. I was flooded with what I consider a telepathic message from the being. I cannot be seen. I cannot be seen. I must travel by night and exist in darkness. I cannot be seen. I cannot be seen. I cannot be seen. And I felt an enormous wave of compassion for the being rather than fear, which may seem a more logical reaction to someone hearing this story. For some reason, my brain only categorized it as one thing initially, an outsider worthy of compassion and tolerance. Its skin was pure chalk white. Not the skin tone white, but the color white. Its eyes were several times larger than ours. It had 2 little air holes for a nose and a very thin mouth. Its frame was completely concealed by its enormous, long, black hooded robe. It looked as though it was quite gaunt underneath, pretty frail looking. It was sitting on its bottom, knees bent, back against the brick front of the rest area, to the left of the front doors of the rest area. It was sitting with its back very straight, tall, and erect. It seemed in awe of me, or maybe in awe that I was actually approaching it. It looked vaguely like a human, very vaguely. Its face was snake-like. Its eyes were right on me. I threw a little everyday smile in its direction and I did something strange. I continued to walk toward the rest area even after seeing it. I walked towards the rest area building, closer to it. I walked forward about 20 feet from the rear of the van to the rest area steps, up the 20 or so steps, and to the right, where the vending machine was located. My thoughts at this point were very bizarre in retrospect. I felt bad for the thing. I didn't want it to feel different. I know that sounds hilariously quaint if we are indeed talking about an interdimensional being, but I didn't want to run back into the van because I didn't want to hurt its feelings. I didn't want to make it feel like a freak. It had already told me that it could not be seen due to the way people would react, so I wanted it to know that I didn't judge it for the way it looked and that I was willing to come to terms with its horrific appearance in order to extend some humanity to it. I did not know about fallen angels and such at the time. So it was with that very bizarrely strong conviction to be righteous and humane to it that I walked toward the vending machine. I actually got pretzels. I'm telling you, my stomach was churning. I used the vending machine with my back to it. Pretzels in hand, I swiveled around to look at it again before descending back down the steps. It was at that moment that pure terror rippled through me. I was closer to it now, approximately 15 feet away, and I could see now that there was definitely no way that it was human. It was staring right at me like a wide-eyed insect. It was still in exactly the same position, except that it had turned its head to look at me better as my position changed. It looked like an alien. It looked like a demon. It was not human. Its huge, one-dimensional eyes did not have whites. They were almond-shaped, like the classic alien eye that we all know. It was then that I realized that it was extremely tall, unthinkably tall. Although I was standing and it was sitting, its head still stood taller than mine. Its huge eyes were fixed on me totally, with fascination, alarm, and with the most intense focus. Just like the way my cat looks at something right before she pounces on it. When I had made the decision to climb the stairs towards it and not to retreat to the van, I thought that it was sitting on top of something and that was why its head was raised up so high. Now, from this closer perspective, I could see that it was not sitting on anything but its own butt. If I had realized that it was this tall at the start, I very well may not have gone up the stairs. So, after the ripple of terror went through me, I responded by smiling the way you smile at a stranger when your eyes catch on the bus. I shot a casual, thin, innocuous little "hey how you doing" smile. Why and how I acted as if things were totally normal, I cannot explain. I have never acted so cool in my life. If I were to guess what the thing was doing when I encountered it, judging by its body language, I would say that it was somewhat displaced and resting. But I have no clue, maybe it was in the middle of something far more sinister. It did not look like a mutant or an experiment. It looked ancient, timeless, and placeless. Graceful, horrible. It was also firmly in this dimension when I saw it. It was not a hazy vision in the slightest. The lighting was not dim. It was not even a remotely ethereal experience. The extremely bright lights that illuminated the front facade of the rest area building revealed every contour of this entity. If only I had been closer, I could have provided much more detail about its facial features. As I was walking back to the van, I quickly strategized about how to make sure that my fear did not paralyze me and prohibit me from getting safely inside the car. I decided not to look back, or even around me as I turned the key, because if I saw that it had moved or I saw it coming towards me, I would have been too terrified to manage with the car keys. I got in the van. I locked the door. I screamed that we needed to leave immediately. We did. As we drove away, about 90 seconds after it was last in my sight, I looked out the window and saw that it was gone. There was nothing where it had been. Just brick wall and concrete floor. I began to tell my boyfriend that I had just had the ultimate experience, and although he was a dude who was always going on about the Vedas and Madame Blavatsky and whatnot, for some reason his only response was a trite "we're in Florida, what do you expect?" He was an extremely abusive person, so I decided to leave it at that and not attempt to share any more with him. As far as the height of the entity, at first, I thought that it was about 9 or 10 feet tall. Now that I am drawing a diagram, I realize that it was likely significantly taller. As I said, its head stood taller than mine, even though I was standing and it was sitting. I am 5 feet 2. That means that it was approximately 6 feet tall from its butt to the top of its head. From its butt to its knees may have been 4 or 5 feet, and from its knees to feet, 3 feet. But that means that it was about 14 feet tall. I can hardly wrap my mind around that.
It was the winter of 1996. My friend Jan and I decided to go on a trip into nature following his doctor's advice. The same as every Saturday, Jan and I went for a walk to the mountain Fruskagora. We stopped by an Esremski Karlovci at Dejan's mother-in-law's. We had a cup of coffee and headed towards Zimajevek. It was a very cold and gloomy morning, and it seemed that it would start snowing any minute. Dejan's mother-in-law poured us boiled wine in a thermos, and it was very useful for us while we were climbing towards Zimajevek in that cold. We planned to go to Brankovac after we had reached Zimajevek, and then to Glavica. When we reached Zimajevek, we sat for a while, we had some rest and refreshed ourselves, and we agreed not to go to Brankovac along the mountain path, but to go through the untouched nature. After 5 days of sitting at the computer and writing invoices, receipts, and other documents, there is no better way to relax but to go into the wilderness, far away from any civilization and everyday life. We went off the path and headed through the thick wood towards Brankovac. I always carry a compass, so it was easy for me to orient myself, and I have a great help from the military topographic maps of the mountain Fruška Gora I had accidentally found a few years ago on the flea market in Novi Sad. The wood was very thick, so Dejan and I had difficulties getting through, and very soon we sat down to have a rest. May Dejan's mother-in-law be blessed, I thought to myself while I was opening the thermos with boiled wine. While we were having a rest and sipping that wine, we suddenly heard loud breaking of the branches coming from Brankovac. I was happy because I thought it might have been a deer or roe deer, which I had rarely seen during the last years on the Fruška Gora. I hurried to Jan and we went towards the place from which the noise was coming. The wood was thicker and thicker, and I was about to drop the search when I heard the crackling of the branches again. This time it was much closer than earlier. We ran towards the noise and soon we were on a small clearing. What I saw at that moment I would remember till I live. Instead of a deer or a roe deer on the clearing, a big man-like creature, almost 3 meters tall, awaited us. It was completely covered with thick, dark brown hair, and its hands were disproportionately big compared to his body, and they reached almost down to his calves. It was hunchbacked, broad-shouldered, and with a strong, short neck with a big head that resembled the head of a chimpanzee or an orangutan, but it was much wider and bigger. It had nothing but the strong, thick hairs on its body, but I did not manage to see whether it was a male or female. I could hardly resist screaming from fear, and when I looked at Dejan, I saw that he was pale with fear and that he was staring at the creature that stood less than 50 meters away from us. We stood that way and stared at it for the whole eternity, when the creature suddenly noticed us. Upon seeing us, it screamed in a way that reminded me of the sound of a bear. I was frozen with fear, thinking that it would attack us. But, to my surprise, the creature hurried to the edge of the clearing, and it disappeared into the woods at incredible speed. It is almost improbable that such a big creature is capable of moving so fast and in such an agile way. When we recovered from the first shock, I suggested to Dejan that we should follow it to find out some more details about it, but Dejan would not even hear about it. Understandably, he was afraid that the creature might attack us, and deep in the woods there was no help. I was persistent, and in the end, Dejan accepted to follow this unusual and unbelievable creature, though unwillingly. I was frightened, of course, but my curiosity was stronger than any fear. We headed towards the place from which the creature went into the woods, and we saw the trails there. They were clear, and it was visible that this creature had a thumb and 4 toes on his foot. I was definitely convinced that it was a man-like creature, not a wild animal as it might have seemed to us because of our fear. We continued through the woods, we followed the trails, and now and then we heard crackling of the branches in front of us. Every time the noise was quieter and quieter, we concluded that it was running away from us. We felt relief when we realized that it was scared of us the same as we were of him, but anyway it was useful to be cautious. At one moment we did not hear any noises, but we could still follow the trails. I was looking at my compass and I saw that the creature was constantly moving towards the northeast. After a few kilometers there were no trails. We searched the district thoroughly looking for the trails, but we found nothing. It seemed as if the creature had disappeared in the ground, or as if it had got wings and flew away. We were so confused that we spent the next few hours thoroughly searching the area, hoping to find its den, or at least a trail that could lead us further. But all our efforts were in vain. We could not find a trail or a hint that there was its den or hiding place.
It was already getting dark, and we had no other choice but to stop the search and to start walking back towards Esremski Karlovci. Since my hobby is photography, I always carry a camera with me when we go for a walk around the Fruška Gora. I am particularly proud of the series of photos of the monasteries on the Fruška Gora, and I was hoping I would have another opportunity to take a photo of this creature. Unfortunately, there was not an opportunity, so I had to be satisfied with the photo of his trails in the snow. The largeness of his foot can be seen if you compare it with Esrata's shoe next to the imprint of the foot of this creature. When I used up the whole film, we walked back towards Esremski Karlovci, quite hungry and frozen. We decided to get back to this part the next day and to try to trail this unusual creature. That is what we did, so we spent the whole next day wandering around the woods between Zimajevac and Jastrabak, but we had not seen either the creature or its trails. We were coming back to the same place during the next few weekends, but our search had no results. Maybe it is better that way, since I had the impression that this creature was not aggressive at all, and that it had only wanted to be left alone. Esrata. And I have definitely given up the search after the Wildman from Vojvodina, as my wife calls it, after 2 months' time. But still, as we are walking through the woods of the Fruška Gora, we react to every noise hoping to see this scary, but, as it seems to me, benevolent wild being.
Flesh-eating giants in Peru. As there is in Peru a story of some giants who landed on the coast at the point of Santa Elena, in the vicinity of the city of Porto Viejo, I have resolved to mention what I was told about them, as I understood it, without taking into account the opinions of the common people and their various anecdotes, for they usually magnify events larger than life. The natives, repeating a story received from their forefathers from very remote times, say that there came from across the sea on reed rafts that were as large as big ships some men that were so big that an ordinary man of good size scarcely reached up to their knees. Their members were in proportion to the size of their bodies, and it a monstrous thing to see their enormous heads and their hair hanging down about their shoulders. Their eyes were as large as small plates. They say they had no beards and that some of them were clad in the skins of animals, and others only in the dress nature gave them. There were no women with them. On reaching this point, they set up their camp like a village, and even in these times there is a memory of the site of their houses. As they found no supply of water, they remedied the lack by making some very deep wells, a labor certainly worthy of record, being undertaken by such strong men as these must have been, to judge by their size. They dug these wells in the living rock until they came to the water, and afterwards they built the wells in stone from the water line upwards so that they would last for ages. In these wells the water is excellent, and it is always so cold that it is very pleasant to drink. When these great men or giants had thus made their settlement and dug these wells or cisterns, they destroyed and ate all the supplies they could find in the neighborhood. It is said that one of them ate more than 50 of the natives of the land, and as the supply of food was not sufficient for them to maintain themselves, they caught much fish with nets and gear that they had. They lived in continuous hostility with the natives, because they slew the latter's women in order to have them, and they also slew the men for other reasons. But the Indians were not numerous enough to kill these newcomers who occupied their land and lorded it over them, and although they held great discussions about this, they never dared attack them. After some years the giants were still in this region, and as they had no women of their own and the Indian women of the neighborhood were too small for them, or else because the vice was habitual to them and inspired by the demon, they practiced the unspeakable and horrible sin of sodomy, committing it openly and in public without fear of God or personal shame. The natives say that our Lord God, unwilling to conceal so wicked a sin, sent them a punishment suited to the beastliness of the crime, and when all the giants were together engaged in this accursed practice there came a fearful fire from heaven to the accompaniment of a great noise, in the midst of which a shining angel appeared holding a sharp, bright sword with which he slew them all at a single stroke, and the fire consumed them, leaving only a few bones and skulls, which God allowed to remain unconsumed as a token of the punishment. This is the account they give of the giants, and we believe that it happened, for it is said that very large bones have been found and still are found thereabouts, and I have heard Spaniards say they have seen pieces of teeth which they thought must have weighed half a pound when whole, and who had also seen a piece of a shin bone of wonderful size, all of which bears witness to the truth of the incident. In addition to this, one can see the places where the sites of their villages were, and also the wells or cisterns they made. I cannot state whence or how these giants came there. In the present year of 1550, when in the city of Lima, I heard that when His Excellency Don Antonio de Mendoza was Viceroy and Governor of New Spain, certain bones of men as big as these giants, and even bigger, were found there. I have heard too that in an ancient sepulchre in the city of Mexico or somewhere else in that kingdom certain bones of giants have been found. Since so many people saw them and attest to having done so, it can therefore be credited that such giants did exist, and indeed they may all have been of the same race. At this point of Santa Elena, which is as I have said on the coast of Peru and in the district of the city of Puerto Viejo, there is a remarkable phenomenon, the existence of certain wells or seams of pitch of such excellent quality that it would be possible to tar all the ships one wished with it, since it flows from the earth. This pitch must be from some seam passing through that place. It comes out very hot.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.